what we want to do today is to ask the existential question, is now the time to turn to what? And what will our future look like? So I want the panel to come up, and I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves for a couple of minutes and talk about what they do and what their organizations do. Mac, we'll start with you, and then we'll move on and have a conversation about where we're going and what that future may look like. Thank you.
So hi, I'm George McCarthy, better known as Mac. I'm the president of the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy. We're a nonprofit think tank in Cambridge, Massachusetts, but we work globally. Most of our work takes place in North America, and the bulk of it is in the United States. And our work is really focused on helping governments at all levels, and then the practitioners that work with them, to find solutions to kind of the vexing challenges of our time, whether it be urban poverty, spatial inequality, or climate change, using innovative land policy approaches. And so land policy approaches might be anywhere from planning to taxation to sequestration of land to harbor carbon. Land policy is a vast kind of area of work, but we consider it to be kind of the rules of the game that kind of mediate the relationship between people and place. And we want to find ways to make places habitable for people. And so that's our goal. And just really happy to be here. So thanks.
Lisa?
I'm Lisa Bender. Is this on and working? Great. I'm Lisa Bender. I'm the president of the Minneapolis City Council. I'm also a planner with a master's degree from UC Berkeley. Go Bears. So more planners and engineers should run for office. And I'll ask you 7 times while I speak if I can, because that's how many times it takes women to decide to run for office. It's after we've been asked 7 times, it's magic. So I hope all of you will actually consider running for elected office in your communities. I ran against an incumbent in 2013. I was a very long shot candidate in my district. I won with 63% of the vote on a vision for my community that included building more housing, more transit and bike lane investments, and in the cities with one of the worst racial disparities in the United States on a platform of race equity. I won re-election a year ago and was elected by my colleagues to be the president of the city council in a clear progressive majority in our community that includes a lot of folks who come directly from community activism. And among the things I've done in office, I was sort of the lead political champion of our Minneapolis 2040 plan, which is a pretty classic TOD plan and includes the elimination of single-family zoning in our city. I also authored a $15 local minimum wage, our inclusionary zoning ordinance, and a lot of renter protection policies. So if you try to pin down my politics, it's a little hard, because what I really care about is making sure that as our city is at a crossroads where we are deciding who gets to live in our community, what kind of environmental impact we're making, that we are making the right choices today to make sure that our community is the equitable place that we want it to be in the future.
Odetta.
Hi, everyone. My name is Odetta MacLeish-White. I'm the managing director for the Transformation Alliance in Atlanta. We are a 30-plus collaborative of businesses, nonprofits, government partners, CDFIs, and intermediaries, all working to strengthen communities through transit. Our work is held together across that diversity of membership by a guiding principle around the role of race as the founding and sustaining issue for why we have disparity, certainly in the South and in the country. And we're also bound together by a clear understanding of the role of transit in access to opportunity, so that whatever your specific issue might be, you understand that being able to get to that job training, get to housing, get to good schools is core to everyone's success. So it's my pleasure to be here as well. Thank you.
So, Odetta, why don't you tell them what a CDFI is?
Happy to. Community Development Finance Institution.
Okay.
Thank you.
We all have all of our acronyms like TOD, but so I won't pick on you for that. So Mac, I wanted to start with you. You told us a little bit kind of about the Lincoln Institute and yourself. And, you guys have a big global reach, but I want you to talk with us for a few minutes more about livable communities and transit in North America, and tell us what the essential coming issues and threats are over the horizon that Rail Volution needs to spend more time, pay more attention to continue to be ahead of the curve and to be impactful. And then why those issues and what do they imply for our movement?
Okay, that's just a few
minutes.
questions. I'll do a dissertation on it for you. Now, well, first of all, one of the things that you should understand with the success that you champion for Rail Volution is that sometimes you have to be careful what you wish for, because to the extent that Rail Volution has been a participant in efforts to really reignite urban living, you've really succeeded. I mean, Rail Volution and lots of others, and certainly the millennials moving back downtown wanting a different kind of lifestyle has been expressed in cities all over the North America. But that's brought with it, of course, really a lot of new challenges, particularly the fact that most of these cities that are getting re-inhabited on top of aging infrastructure. Many of this infrastructure has been in place for over 100 years. And so one of the things that we're really going to have to assess going forward is, what is the carrying capacity of the infrastructure in our cities? Because as we densify, we have to understand that densifying requires the right kind of underground infrastructure, the right kind of other infrastructure, because otherwise we can't provide the services that make it possible to sustain quality of life in place. This challenge is only going to be exacerbated by climate change. And our attempts to kind of make our urban infrastructure resilient is going to be, I would say, one of the colossal challenges of the next 3 decades. We don't have to look very far to see what it means to have infrastructure that's not resilient, whether if we look at Superstorm Sandy a few years ago, or we look at Snowmageddon in the East Coast in 2015. Look at the hurricanes that we've had over just the last few years, and the flooding in the Midwest. All of it kind of really disabled a lot of our transportation infrastructure and other infrastructure as well. And I think that we're going to have to contemplate New Deal levels of investment in infrastructure and planning for infrastructure that's very different from the infrastructure that we built in the past. I think we're also going to have to really confront the challenge of monocentric cities that are absolutely congested in the core, because as people have moved back into the core, and we've congratulated ourselves for moving people back into the core, we've now generated congestion that is unparalleled, especially in the coastal cities in the US and Canada. And we're going to have to make some kind of investment that's going to find a way to redistribute population into more polycentric metros. And the best way to do that is with a fully articulated rail system. But we have rail systems that are probably very often 20 or 30 years beyond their useful life. And the amount of investment we're going to have to make for reliable rail that's going to make it possible for us to live without cars in larger cities with new centers is going to be the challenge of the next century, but certainly the next 25 years. And of course, the biggest question there is, how are we going to pay for all of that? It's not as if we don't have the resources in the US and Canada. The question is, do we have the political will to marshal the resources to do what we need to do to make our cities work? Because in the end, making cities work is also one of the solutions to mitigate climate change, and we all know that. Reducing vehicle miles traveled is going to be one of the challenges we need to do to reduce the loading of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. But that's only one solution, because we also know we've gone way past the point at which we're not going to have to deal with the negative consequences of flooding our subways, flooding our rail systems, flooding our streets, flooding our homes, and destroying kind of our way of life for long periods of time when these weather events happen more and more frequently. So right now, I think that it's really incumbent on us to think about how we're going to plan to make the investments that we need, and how that planning is going to really serve everybody. It's going to engage the whole community. And one of the things that we do at the Lincoln Institute is we build tools. So we've now, we've organized a consortium of scenario planners. We've built a whole bunch of new tools that will help people to imagine new potential scenarios and find pathways to them. And it allows us to engage large numbers of people in the planning. And we have to open up that process so it's no longer kind of behind the veil where a few planners come and decide how the city's going to work and then come and tell us how it's all going to work. It's now going to find a way to engage the community and serve the community. And I just leave it there.
Okay. So Lisa or Odetta, you have any comments on what you just heard from Mac or a different perspective?
Go for it.
I mean, I think we're feeling all of that, those dynamics really viscerally on the ground in our communities. And as an elected official, I think for us, it is incumbent on us to both lead through change, and we need bold political leadership in communities across the country. That's why you should run for office, number two. Ask number two. But I also think that we need the profession of planning and engineering and architecture and activism to rethink our role as professionals in a political system. So I've talked to so many planners in my 20 years almost in the profession who say something like, I don't do politics, I do planning. And I want to offer you that whether or not you run for office, you do political work, and it is your job. It is part of your job to advocate and organize for change that is in a system of values that you can stand behind as a professional. And like how we use data matters, what kind of data we use and how we interpret it matters. You can't expect your elected official to stand up there and make the case if you're not bringing along the how and why. And I think our profession also needs to reckon with the history of development in our country, in the United States. And our country is, it is no accident that in Minneapolis, you're 27% more likely to be homeless if you're a Native American person, versus your population, or 5 times more likely to be homeless if you're Black than your representation in the population at large. It is part of the legacy of occupation of indigenous lands and of slavery. And if we can't say that and own that and talk about how we've codified that history in our zoning codes, in our banking systems, and in all levels of government throughout our history, we can't move forward in a way that is equitable.
Odetta?
Yeah, I think all I could add to that great statement would be, let's also practice something that we have not practiced before, which is doing that concurrently with the ideas of finding resources, building out, land value, et cetera. We tend to push that difficult conversation away and say, let's construct a path first, and then somehow we'll come back and we will touch on these histories, we will acknowledge, but we don't sort of concurrently design the solutions with folks in mind. We think we're going to come back, and we have never really done that part, come back around. So a difference and a change in the next 25 years would be doing that work at the same time.
So Lisa, your big complicated question, and we'll make them easier as we go along, I hope. Over the 25 years of Rail Volution, there's been a shift in the power base of innovation and change for metropolitan areas. When we started, we heard a lot from the federal government as a partner. And the feds were a reason that a lot of people came to Rail Volution in kind of chasing that cookie jar of federal money. But that's not so much the case anymore. Today, the innovation and the change happens in cities and regions and a handful of states. And those places seem to be the kind of Silicon Valleys of livable communities where the innovation happens and where that bubbles up. And this conference hasn't done, I think, as good of a job as it wants to do in attracting those city, regional, and state change agents to be at our table, those innovators. So can you tell us, as one of those, coming from one of those places, what are they looking for, and what can we do to have more of them here and to benefit collectively from that?
Yeah. So, I mean, if you think of Rail Volution as not an organization or a conference, but as a movement that is made up of professions that are profoundly shaping the future of our communities, I think that we need, again, I think we need to radically re-examine our roles and the questions we are asking in community. You know, the innovation that is happening at the local level is coming out of crisis. It's coming out of a crisis of federal disinvestment in affordable housing, in many cases, in disinvestment in transit and transportation at the state level. And so there's only so much we can do at the local level with our local property tax base to fix all of the problems that are coming at us. You know, I wasn't even born, or you know, maybe I was a toddler when the federal government started walking away from affordable housing, the consequences of which are becoming more and more dire. And so I think things, you know, I think as a movement, as an organization, any professional organization has to throw out the ideas of what is radical and what is possible, throw out the ideas of a political left and right, and really start to ask real questions about, you know, what will it really take to achieve a vision of a sustainable and equitable future for our communities. You know, I think we need more support at the local level. I also know that we can't let our state and federal governments off the hook, and that it is impossible to build a sustainable future without, you know, at least federal support, I think, for a lot of things that we're doing. But if we can take that innovation that we are seeing bubble up all across North America in cities, and link together the innovators who are doing it. When I see presentations about change in cities across the country, I usually know which council member in that city championed that policy, and I've usually met them, and I usually have their cell phone number. And so if we can even just link together the innovators to say, hey, you know, I saw your inclusionary zoning ordinance coming through, how did you do it? Because there's always the story behind the story. And you know, our profession can make the case, we can show data, we can be innovative about funding sources, but the story behind the story is how do we make something politically possible? And we might have to ask ourselves really hard questions about that. You know, is it really right? You know, is it effective to tell communities who have been systemically harmed by government intervention for centuries to just trust us when this train comes in, we'll figure out the affordable housing part later? It isn't. And I think in order to do that, we have to really ask ourselves, you know, what are the kinds of professional recommendations coming from our professions as a community? And are things like rent increase caps that Oregon just recently passed, is that a radical idea? Or is it a radical idea that a landlord can charge infinity more rent with no notification to a tenant, affecting, you know, in a lot of our cities, more than half of our population? You know, which of those two things is more a radical notion? And you know, I think as a community of professionals, we have to start to understand that the status quo isn't working for so many people that it means that the status quo itself may be a radical idea of concentrating power and wealth in a very few hands. And you know, how do we come together from folks of all communities, all sizes, all backgrounds, and really start to ask those hard questions and challenge each other? You know, challenge me, right? We're about to do some things in Minneapolis that were really hard and took a lot of political will, but are we really truly going to build an equitable city with the tools we have today, or do we need to go even farther? And I think that's what this network of professionals can provide, is both the inspiration and the accountability to each other to ask those really hard questions in the urgency of the moment that we find ourselves in today.
So Mac, give us a minute or so of your perspective on what you just heard.
So I live in a really kind of privileged space because at the Lincoln Institute, we work all over the world, and we're able to go and witness and even study innovation in place. And then we're able to kind of tell the story of how that innovation works and hopefully be able to bring it and share it with others and transplant it. And one of the biggest lessons we've learned in that is that it's really hard to transplant one innovation from one place to another, because our ability to learn from success is really, really limited. Because very often we see a success and we all have an account, we can probably try to tell you why something succeeded, but we learn way better when we fail than we do from success. And one of the things that we always forget is that context is hugely, hugely important for how kind of an urban innovation unfolds. And so for us, one of the things that we're trying now to unpack is the ideas that people want to kind of learn from, whether it's how you mobilize revenue from land that results from public action, from public investment, or by upzoning, and how you actually then use that revenue to do other things like invest in your infrastructure. We're able to account for that in 20, 30, 40 places around the world, how it works, and then figure out how we can make that work in new places. And so that's one of the things that we hope to be able to do to address the challenges of how we're going to pay for kind of all the infrastructure we'll need to make cities work in the future, which is how we're going to mobilize new sources of revenue, and how we're going to find ways to transplant useful and effective practices done in one place, whether it's Sao Paulo, Brazil, or whether it's the London Crossrail, or whether it's the Purple Line in Maryland, and learn enough to be able to not just tell people what to do, but to help them get that last mile of implementation right so that it'll actually work in another place. So that's something that I think is a colossal challenge and something we've only learned a little bit from. And I would say the most innovative things that we've seen are the efforts that find ways to overcome the collective action problem. And what it is finding ways not just to work at the little community level, but to work at the big community level, whether it's a metro, and get multiple governments or multiple levels of governments all pointing in the same direction, all firing on the same cylinders, all pulling together to make something work. And we've seen it happen dozens of times in the US where we had the Sustainable Communities Initiative, where whole areas, hundreds of local governments might come together to address a public transit challenge or address an affordable housing challenge. And those kinds of things we need to celebrate, document, and then replicate as much as we can.
So Odetta, give us your take on how we get the local government regional innovators to the table.
So I'm gonna give my answer, and we'll see if it's exactly the right one. But I want to start by saying that I struggle a little bit with the word innovation, right? From my perspective, working in a collaborative, Transformation Alliance is one of 6 cities working inside a larger collaborative called the Strong, Prosperous, and Resilient Communities Challenge, and it's been a tremendous learning journey about what it means to collaborate truly. Not just to sort of cobble silos together in some kind of way, but to figure out how to collaborate. And one of the things that has become more clear to me, or that I'm reminded of, is the solutions that we're talking about, be it more authentic relationship building, be it better communication just from person to person, is stuff that happens all the time. It's not actually innovation. A real innovation, to sort of vibe a little bit off what Lisa said, race is an innovation. The construct of race is actually the innovation that we are all now living in and trying to get out from under, right? And it is the innovation that had to be developed to justify the imbalance of power. How do you, as a human being who is meant to be in relationship and social with another human being, find a way to sell a fellow human being, to physically harm a fellow human being, to trek them 4,000 miles from their ancestral home from one state to another? You have to apply some sort of deadening topical, concept to sort of get yourself to be able to do that. And that's what race is. That's the innovation here. So to the idea of let's flip things, let's remember what's really innovation and what is actually an enduring set of concepts that we need to get back to and practice all the time. So that is actually framing, hopefully, what is closer to the specific question, which is city, regional, and state actors are human beings like anyone else who want to be in relationship. One of the great things about the SPARK program has been asking us to explore art and culture approaches, and a lot of that is about storytelling and creating spaces to share stories with one another. And then I think as you do that at the city and regional and local level, all the ideas that were already in us emerge. They are diverse and a sort of a multi-solving approach to our shared challenges. So I think to bring more city, regional, and state change agents, let's first remember that they're people. Let's look at how we gain more skill set around collaboration between just human beings. And then we apply that shared thinking and that power to problem solving.
Great. So Odetta, now the kind of longer question for you. Like others on this panel, you've worn a lot of different hats, and that's kind of reflective of what Rail Volution is about. But we've been collecting more different kinds of hats over the years, and that's been essential to tackling the challenge of creating livable communities. There's been an evolution, a mix of a diversity that we've needed to bring more in. But that was our past. What about our tomorrow? If Rail Volution is going to stay on its toes, whether we call it innovation or whatever we need to call it, how do we stay meaningful and continue to strengthen communities with transit for another quarter of a century and challenge new topics and new challenges at the same time?
Right. So I think Rail Volution's ability to embrace the reality of identity and lived user experience is what's going to set it apart in the next 25 years and increase the value proposition of a conference that's already of this size and credibility. We have to understand and center the deep complexity of people's lives, right? Access to transit is one problem-solving strategy that people use to tackle the complexity of their life and to get things done that they need to get done every day. So in fact, the topics and challenges, again, are not necessarily new because people will always need a true living wage, a career or employment that supports them throughout all the stages of their lives, stable and affordable housing, lifelong education, meaningful relationships, right? The list is long and everyone could add to it. But we live in an age where it's really critical to ground our strategies and values in making life better for those who are vulnerable. And I think Rail Volution should be giving more and more and more space to exploring and explaining how identity is shaping what people need from their transit and how they get to it. It was really great to sit in some sessions today looking at the experience of women. I, as a grown woman, remember how it felt to get catcalled in the street, and I don't get catcalled in my car, right? So when you have young girls who are experiencing that harassment for the first time or the 20th time or the 100th time, they will stop walking. They will stop using the infrastructure the way we want them to, and they begin to feel isolated and upset. And that is not the kind of livable community that we want to tackle. So what does RV want to say about that? Thank you. In a meaningful way. How does RV tackle that question in a meaningful way? Keep having these great sessions, keep exploring deeper and deeper levels of identity. So what does safety and livability mean to transgender people, to people of color, to differently abled people, to Black parents and parents of color who are concerned with the literal physical safety, as I am, of their children and their sons and their daughters out in a world where they're going to be profiled and harmed. We have to get really real about the lived experiences of all of these groups. And I do think we can focus more on children and families and youth as users of transit. I got to credit a gentleman named Doug Joyner in Atlanta for really helping me start to explore and understand that we do not include this critical audience and user of our transit nearly enough in our planning and in our conversation. And if we can help children be safe as they move around their community, we're going to be helping parents solve problems as well. And now you've engaged in a conversation that will reveal the type of content that's going to be powerful, the type of issues and topic areas, the type of experts. I saw a really interesting tweet at the beginning of the conference about who gets to be an expert at a conference like Rail Volution. I think Rail Volution is an amazing platform and has a great opportunity to enrich that definition of an expert in these issues. As both practitioner and technical and also very much lived and frontline. And then we will start to really understand the kind of content that will keep Rail Volution relevant and powerful for another 25 years. Okay.
So Lisa, do you have a quick thought about what you just heard?
Since yesterday morning, I thought the opening plenary yesterday morning did a good job of setting the stage for this idea of how do we define expertise and how do we honor the lived experiences of people in our community. And I think, there's a progression of that to say, how can this organization, this group of people here in this room and our colleagues really truly center and honor the lived experiences and expertise of the people in our community that we are seeking to help or to support or to include. And I think that means really stepping back and understanding how our process to make public decisions works and how it defines expertise. Can we truly center the expertise of an IV drug user who is experiencing homelessness in a way that not only respects their humanity, but their expertise in how we can solve the opioid crisis and the homelessness crisis that is happening across our cities? And how can we set up a process that really truly does that puts folks on an equal playing field with someone who has multiple degrees or this fancy pin that says I'm an elected official, and and these constructs that we have created to elevate expertise, can we extend it truly to folks in our community with the expertise that we really need to solve these problems? I think it is a critical question that I have also been mulling over the time I've been here. I think that this conference has done a good job of opening that and building on that in the future is critical.
So Mac, what's your quick take?
So I guess my question is, you asked before about, it's impossible, or you mentioned it's impossible to imagine the future, but it's possible to shape it. But the real question is who does the shaping? And one of the things that we have to recognize is that many of the positions of power are still held by people who have done it from a position of privilege, a position of historic privilege. And we have to find a way to change the ranks of the people who are sitting in these new commissions, these new authorities, these new planning bodies, so that we actually find a way to make the transit system actually work to meet their needs, not to work to meet the needs that are imagined by somebody who might not even use the transit system. And so one of the things that is of real interest to us is building the capacity of people to be able to participate in the planning, to participate in the shaping of the future, and making sure that we broaden the participation in really, really meaningful ways. And that's why I mentioned earlier things like this consortium for scenario planning. We're finding ways to use new technologies to enlist participation, but we're also trying to find ways to skill up individuals and understand that planning isn't an exercise in which people shout for what they want the most. Planning is actually an exercise in which people make really, really constrained decisions in an environment of scarcity and have to make choices. But we should make sure that the choices really reflect the interests of everybody, not the interests of people who have come from a position of privilege, who now are in a position of authority and decision making. And we need to open up that process. And part of opening up that process is, of course, right here in the panel. We have people who are now not representative of the old community of decision makers, but a new community of decision makers that I applaud to have, and I'm really proud to have them with me.
So Lisa, at a certain point, that change bubbles up from the community, or maybe it bubbles up from other places, and it requires a political calculation about, are we going to listen to that? Mm-hmm. How are we going to shape that? Is it the right question, as opposed to just the concern? And at Rail Volution, we have placed a high value on change, and hopefully empowering people to go back to their communities and stick their necks out and make the necessary change. Yeah. So from the politician's perspective, if they're going to go back to their community and build that coalition or build that change, what's your advice to them? How do we stick our necks out and be successful?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, You have to go back to your communities and stick your necks out, because our future depends on it. And whatever that means to you, I mean, hold on to that, because I think it's real. And I think, for elected leaders, look, there is always going to be compromise and strategy and triangulation, and, sometimes it's going to take a really long time to get something really small done. Partly that's why I think just screw the little thing that took 5 years to get done. Do the big, bold thing that took 7 or 10 years to get done, because we're spending so much time around the margins. We're spending so much time, negotiating a little bit here and a little bit there, instead of asking these fundamental questions about who gets to benefit from change in our community and who gets to be at the table. I think there's some really simple, practical things that professionals can do to set those tables differently. I think in the city of Minneapolis, when we started working on the 2040 plan, our new comprehensive plan, we brought that policy through incrementally through our political process. And we had a champion in me who understood planning, and I worked very hard to support our professional planners who did an amazing job. So you might not feel, and I don't know if our staff always feel loved by me either, but I hope they do, and I hope you do. But even if that's not there, I think it is possible to shape a process that manages the politics from a place of values decision making. So we did community engagement from the very beginning of our process that went out to community. We have a series of cultural communities that we work with. We've hired staff from community to help facilitate these discussions, or nonprofit organizations to go out to folks' places of worship, to farmers markets, to street festivals, and ask people basic questions about how they get around in our city. What is it like to physically move through our transportation system? What is it like to try to find housing? What is it like to try to find a job? So that you don't have to know professional planning jargon to have a voice in your community's future. And from that, we heard loud and clear, we can't find an affordable place to live, it doesn't feel safe to bike or walk, the transit system isn't working. And we knew that we could make a case to elected officials that there was broad support in our community around an analysis of the problems we wanted to solve and the basic values we wanted to shape our future growth. So we brought that through the council. We adopted a vision, we adopted 14 goals. They're only meaningful if we follow through, but because our staff were always able to go back and say, we adopted this vision, we adopted these goals, then we adopted a community engagement plan that the council voted on that said, we're going to do these things, talk to cultural communities, go out to street festivals. We're not going to do these things. Go to every single neighborhood organization in the city of Minneapolis and ask the 8 people there what they think we should zone their neighborhood to look like. And so it was both what's there and what wasn't there, explicitly making a commitment on the elected official level to do things differently. And I think that these are strategies that no matter what the political landscape looks like in your city, you can lay the groundwork for these things. We have now adopted a race equity action plan as part of the implementation of our comprehensive plan. We have a lot of political support in Minneapolis right now, but it has been built very deliberately over time. And I think any planner or engineer in this room can take any of these lessons and start to apply them even to the smallest project in your community and make a difference.
So Odetta, part of your job is to stick your neck out and to get the Lisas of the world to pay attention. So how do you do that? And how do you know that you've been successful?
Stuff gets done, is how you know it's successful. But one, I want to make sure to always sort of center this in a human way. Lisa has a personal commitment to these issues, right? So that helps a lot when you are not spending that face time with someone, convincing them of basic humanity and history and let's spend our brain power on something else, right? I will, very bluntly, it has helped Transformation Alliance a lot to be funded by an organization. Spark is our national. We've had a lot of great local support in Atlanta as well that tells us, speak truth to power, we will fund you. So I think funders should be funding groups, organizing frontline groups, collaboratives, fund them to win, right? Fund them in ways that send them out to these difficult conversations, fearlessly. I speak the way I do because I know I have a core funding that will not leave because I talk about white supremacy and racism. And when Transformation Alliance sort of reframed its membership goals around acknowledging race and racism, we doubled our membership. People want to hear this value statement so that they can express their value statement through membership and things like that. And I think Rail Volution has a great opportunity to think about the skill sets, because you will leave here and all step back into the same history and power dynamics that you left, right? Those are all still waiting for you, but what are the skill sets that Rail Volution could be exploring that, one, because if you're going to talk about power and privilege, you should be asking the experts, the people who experience the disparity every day, to come and give sessions and to express how to deal with it and how to do organizing, right? If you take it from that perspective, now you've opened up a whole new level of folks that can show people how to do it. Part of sticking your neck out is just knowing that you'll be okay. It won't be easy, but you will make it. And so we need to be taught. Some of us need to be taught and others relearn skills of community organizing. And then that's a lot where your courage comes from, and the resilience when you observe people that are living in these disparities every day and they get up and they make it work. They do they drop their kids off to school and they find a way to do work and be environmental justice warriors. Like, it happens, right? But you have to understand that it's complex and reliant very much on individual personal commitment and transformation.
So Mac, you said that you have a special opportunity kind of working at the global scale and collecting some of these stories and successes. Are there things that are kind of common threads through those kinds of people or places that have stuck their necks out and delivered change, or is that the wrong question?
No, I think it's the right question, and I think that just an example came to mind. And so, in the state of Colorado, they have the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. If you want to do anything big in Colorado, you got to bring it to a referendum and get people to agree that they're going to pay for things. So almost 20 years ago, at the time, the mayor of Denver, John Hickenlooper, said, we need to do something about this city because the city is not working. It's not working on a variety of different levels. And the first thing he did was he said, I'll stick my neck out by saying, let's create this mayor's caucus, one mayor, one vote, and get all the mayors of the jurisdictions in the greater Denver area to sit down and talk about what this place needs. And that was a big step to take, because basically he was saying, I'm not going to use the leverage I have from being the biggest jurisdiction in the metro. We're all going to talk on an even playing field. And that was a principle-based discussion, right? And so they all got together and they said, if we really want Denver to work, we got to find a way to solve our transportation problems. We got to find a way to actually build a public transportation system, because we can't be a world-class city without a public transportation system. And so they decided they were going to go together and they're going to go and ask the voters in a state with the Taxpayer Bill of Rights to tax themselves to the tune of $6 billion to build a light rail system. And with all the mayors as leaders, and then kind of, enlisting the support of a lot of civil society players, foundations, community organizers, a whole bunch of different actors, they actually went out and through a campaign, they got almost 2/3 of the voters to vote to support taxing themselves to invest in a light rail system, many of whom would never even see that light rail transportation for like 12 years or more, and they're going to pay taxes for 12 years on the faith, on the hope that they were going to get that system. Those are big things, and those are the kinds of things that we really need to be thinking about doing everywhere. We need to be able to overcome our own egos and our own inability to kind of move together to do this. But Denver didn't stop there, because that same group of civic actors, the organizers, the foundations, they decided, now that we have the money, now that we're going to be planning this fast tracks light rail system, let's make sure we do it right. Let's make sure that we attend to spatial equity. Let's make sure we build affordable housing and connect people to opportunity. And they actually created a civic organization called Mile High Connects that did the analysis, that did all the planning and the advocacy to make sure that the right decisions were made, and it wasn't just a light rail system that served the elites of Denver, but it was a light rail system that's going to serve all of the Denver metro region. And so what I see is the ability of people to get out of their own way to see what is it going to take to do something, but then when they actually are committed and they're actually able to make a cogent argument, they can actually win public support, because it's not very often that we get people who voluntarily agree to tax themselves for the next 20 years, right? And in a place where they could actually easily say no, they didn't say no. They said with a great majority, they said yes. And so I think that, you know, having a vision, selling a vision, finding a way to get out of your own way to make that vision real, those are the kind of leadership we need, it's the kind of innovation we need, and there's the kind of stuff that I think we can get done everywhere if we're going to make the kinds of investments we're going to need to make our cities work in the next 25 years.
Okay. So maybe for the whole panel, and we can start with Odetta this time. As Rail Volution continues to evolve as a movement and as a conference, what do we need to give greater attention to? Because if we keep just doing what we did, I don't think we stay fresh. But you know, what's the thing that needs more attention?
I am really intrigued and excited by things like new rail volutionaries, right? That thing that looks generationally to who's coming along, and how do we prepare them and arm them with skill sets and understanding of, you know, the importance of community organizing, power and privilege analysis, you know, the basics even of planning and writing ordinances. Like, they need to know the mechanics, and they also need to have the ability to assess who's going to be benefited and who's going to be burdened by the things that they're talking about, and then how to get into right conversation with residents and their neighbors, right? Their neighbors on these topics. And you know, we are a nation of immigrants, and that is one population that is not declining. So there's going to be this amazing pool of talent, right? There's always been an amazing pool, but it's coming, right? And they want to express with their careers a set of values that acknowledge racism, that acknowledge misogyny and homophobia, and differently abled people not having what they need to get around. Like, they want to bring all of those values to the table, and they would be such amazing new city planners and new mayors and all of those positions that we want to fill. So Rail Volution, I know there are scholarships, there's the program of new Rail Volutionaries, but I feel like another frontier might be really getting intentional about pipelining, you know, graduates of HBCUs, Native American students, transgender students, not just into the conference, but into specific sort of arcs of learning on these topics, and local mentorship or national mentorship, so that you have created the experts, if you want, or the people who will come and sit here in 25 years and talk about things and present the panels in 25 years. You know, and then one like super technical thing that I jotted down was, you know, what is the role of a conference of this size and credibility in modeling certain techniques? So Race Forward, Facing Race, the Facing Race conference in Detroit, actually entered into a community benefits agreement with Detroit, because it, you know, brings so much power and economic leverage, a conference of that size. How can Rail Volution, you know, really explore what it means to bring this many people into a city and make sure, and if it's already happening, let's express it. Like, I don't want to assume it's not happening, but there are frames and ways to really show, hey guys, this is what a community benefits agreements look like. You know, try it in your locality. Don't be afraid of it. It's fine. You know, everyone benefits from it. So I think just constantly pushing deeper and deeper. You know, let's support new identities. Let's support people who want to bring their whole selves to the work and to the roles, and use the conference to model the type of strategies and behaviors we want to see.
So Mac, what needs more attention?
So, you know, I think what we're going to confront over the next 25 years is this constant chant that we can't afford things. And I think one of the things that Rail Volution can be helpful with is helping us to really kind of demystify where it is that value is generated. And so one of the things that we have been attentive to at Lincoln is the idea that public investment in transportation infrastructure, in other infrastructure, public action like changing zoning rules, results in really large changes in land values. But those changes in land values are a result of no action at all of the landowner And so very often we take public action, but we basically give away the goods that we create with no expectation in return. So to recover that land value that we create through public action is something that I think is going to be fundamental to helping us to pay for the things we need when everybody's going to be running around chanting that we can't afford it. Now, thanks. The other thing is that, and this is something that really came as a shock to me, so we've been working with this group called the Infrastructure Lab in Washington, D.C., and one of the things that we've been talking about is the extent to which localities know anything about their capital budget. As it turns out, so they've been working in Australia with New South Wales on a project called asset recycling, where they did a full inventory of all the assets owned by the governments of New South Wales to find out if they could manage those assets as a portfolio to generate revenue from some of the assets to invest in others, monetizing them, selling them, doing whatever they wanted to do in a portfolio management method. And what they ended up doing there was they leased their power lines to a private company to generate enough revenue to build a light rail in Brisbane. They paid for the light rail with just the leasing of their power grid, right? So we decided to import this to the United States, and the first jurisdiction in the United States that has a fully articulated capital inventory is Washington, D.C., and I think it's the only one. It's the only jurisdiction in the United States that knows everything they own, where it is, what their condition is, and what it's going to take to bring that up to snuff, right? But they also know what buildings they own, what land they own that could be monetized to be used to invest in things like their failing public transit system. And now they're trying to find a way to engage in that kind of portfolio management to find new revenue that could be used to invest in the infrastructure they need. And so this isn't magic, right? It's been done lots and lots of places. It's done by companies all the time. We just haven't done it yet on the public sector side. And Rail Volution can help us to be really, really kind of thoughtful and entrepreneurial in the ways that we manage kind of the public sector to get to the outcomes we need to deliver the quality of life that we think people deserve, right?
So Lisa, from where you sit, what needs more attention?
Yeah, I mean, I love both of these ideas, and I guess from my lens on the political side, I think I want to return to this theme of what kinds of questions are we asking, and as actors in a political system, how are we able to be optimistic about local democracy functioning, right? If we are optimistic about local democracy functioning, a lot of our communities are majority renter or majority people of color today, or will become so soon. And so what is the political calculation if we believe that cities should be walkable and transit oriented, and we want to fight climate change, and we want to preserve farmland and natural land, and we believe in urban development? What is a practical political consideration that really actually looks at what kind of decisions do we need to make today to lay the groundwork to be able to continue that into the future? And I think for a long time, our field has made a political calculation that says, well, we can get privileged people to support development if we give them amenities out of it, right? So if we use tax increment or other tools to fund parks or open spaces or community centers or other amenities, we can make a political math that says, well, we can get enough votes to get something through to support growth. But I think a more realistic and authentic political calculation today and moving forward has to engage more authentically in a different kind of calculation that says, how do we really truly, as an organization, as a movement, center the voices of people in their own lived expertise, not only just through inviting folks to panels, but when we go home, like, how are we hiring planners in our departments? Are we only hiring people with certain educational or credentials, backgrounds? Are we extending opportunities to people with lived expertise in our communities? As white people who benefit from privilege, are we able to use the words white privilege so that our colleagues of color don't have to carry the emotional burden of educating white people about white privilege? Black women make, 60% on the dollar? I mean, black women should make 130% on the dollar because of all of the emotional labor that they bring to the table and their jobs every day. And so, I mean, I think there's a connectivity between what we do at this conference and what we do that we go home. That's about making an authentic, both, I think, realistic, but also the right way of bringing people to the table for the future.
So I want each of you to spend 3 minutes, and you can see the clock going down, and just kind of sum up for if it was 25 years ahead and we were successful, how would we know we were successful?
We meaning the conference? We meaning society? We meaning I get to pick in my answer?
Well, I think Rail Volution is a reflection of the communities that are interested in doing these things. So I think it's a little bit of both, but it's where you're comfortable answering the question.
I would love to live in a world where just to harken back to what I said, where I don't worry for the safety of my kids, where I don't do a calculus about my son wants to ride his bike somewhere and I say, no, not so much because he's unsafe on the bike. I'm concerned about when he gets to his destination, who's going to profile him and will he be safe in that store? Like that would be a sign of some progress where I did not carry some of that specific fear for either my son or my daughter. I think we can look to, in some ways, very, you'll see it, right? If the panels look different, if the air quote experts are more diverse, carry more histories, if we know what those histories are, if we get to a place where we can say the words that need to be said and share our personal stories in ways that don't make you feel discredited if you share a piece of information about yourself, and in fact it's just laying the groundwork for connection, and maybe things won't feel so hard. We would also know if the processes that we go through to plan, they'll never be simple, right? And they'll never be fast, but do they have to feel quite so hard and adversarial? And what's happening is people are, they're coming hard at what they know is the power differential, right? And they're trying to speak louder to be heard in a system that they know is not built for them. So if they knew the system was built for them, if they knew that they had participated and co-designed a system, we would just, it would be more restorative in some weird way to go through these processes and envision and plan together than it currently is.
So Mac, what's your take on that?
So in the first place, I think that we'll know we're successful if we can look at a map and we map out the population by income, ethnicity, and race, and we don't see concentrations of those classes defining the map. Right? I mean, if you look at any city in the country, any city in the world, really, if we map by income, by race, and ethnicity, we can identify every neighborhood that we already know because we've done such a good job of really kind of organizing ourselves in space in exactly the wrong way. The other thing is, I think that we'd be able to look at the map and see clusters of really dense centers connected by really, really effective transportation. And then the third way we would know is that the lead story on the national news won't be about some major infrastructure failure resulting from some unexpected storm or some other kind of unexpected event like a wildfire or something else, because we've actually been able to implement plans that have somehow found a way to take us out of harm's way. And so I think that little by little, if we're actually bold enough and we're able to plan and implement those plans, 25 years is actually a pretty long time, and we can actually get a hell of a lot done in 25 years if we set our minds to it. It didn't take us 6 or 7 years to build our way out of the Great Depression after World War II, when we decided that we were going to kind of make this country work. At least for white people it worked, right? It didn't work so well for a little bit while longer, and still not so well for people of color.
Many other people.
Yes, and many other people. But I think, if we, summoning the political will and then implementing those kinds of strategies isn't off the table, and it will be expressed in ways that we can easily visualize in things like maps.
You know, I am an optimist, and I believe that we can make a lot of change in 25 years when my kids will be in their early 30s. But I also know that we are standing in a moment of centuries of discrimination, of white supremacy, of institutionalized exploitation of many of our neighbors. And we are seeing a modern version of that in our immigrant communities today. And in order to make the change that we need to see to fight climate change and make sure all of our kids actually have safe and healthy places to live, but do it in a way that reverses that painful history that our communities all have, the kinds of change that we would need to make today, looking out 25 years, is not small. It is radical systemic change. It is putting things like rent control and congestion pricing not on the fringes of what we talk about, but as moderate strategies that are almost like the very least we could do to achieve those goals. Just as some examples of particular policies that I think right now are like not even seen as mainstream. And so I am both optimistic that we can find the courage to do that, but I'm also pragmatic about how much we really need to do and how much we all need to be brave and stick out our necks and, and embrace the responsibility that we all have, the privilege that we get to serve our communities, and start talking about the kind of change that we need to see to make that future a reality.
Well, thank you. I'd like the audience to thank our panel, and then we can kind of keep moving. Really nice job.